Ibrahim Traoré knelt before the grave of Thomas Sankara. Just as the first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, the cemetery was silent. Only the whisper of wind in the grass and the distant hum of waking birds broke the stillness. Dew clung to the earth, and the scent of the coming rainy season lingered in the air. He had dismissed his security detail at the gate with firm instructions. Wait. These visits were not for ceremony nor spectacle. They were sacred, personal, a communion with the man whose ghost still shaped the hopes of a nation. Sankara's headstone was simple: his name, his birth and death, 1949 to 1987, and the words that still echoed across Africa. While revolutionaries as individuals can be murdered, you cannot kill ideas. Traoré bowed his head. At 34, he was younger than Sankara had been when assassinated. The burden of leadership, of walking in such footsteps, weighed heavily. "I'm trying to follow your path, Capitaine," he whispered, using the affectionate title the Burkinabe still used. "But the enemies are many, and they do not sleep." 8 months into his presidency, Traoré stood on a precipice. The West was tightening its grip. Economic sanctions, frozen aid, diplomatic pressure. France had withdrawn its troops after being expelled. The IMF threatened to cut support unless he surrendered key economic reforms that would return control of Burkina Faso's wealth to foreign corporations. The air in international halls of power buzzed with quiet warnings. He is going too far. Some nights, pacing the cold, neo-colonial corridors of the presidential palace, Traoré wondered if true sovereignty was even possible in a world built to prevent it. He shifted to stand, and that's when he saw it. A glint, a flash of metal beneath the headstone's edge. Curious, he crouched again, brushing aside a thin layer of red soil. Embedded in the dirt was a small, corroded key, distinctive in its unusual shape. As he turned it in his hand, something else caught his eye. The earth around the grave appeared, disturbed, recently and deliberately. Instinct kicked in. He dug with his fingers, ignoring the sting of stone and grit. 6 inches down, his hand struck something solid, a box, metal, about the size of a thick book, sealed against the elements. Stainless steel, unmarked except for a faint engraving of the Burkina Faso flag. He slid the key into the lock. It turned. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound journal. Atop it lay a folded sheet of paper, yellowed by time but perfectly preserved. Traoré unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Thomas Sankara. To the one who finds this testament, if you are reading these words, then you have discovered what I could not reveal in life. This journal contains the truth about our nation's wealth, the nature of our bondage, and a path to liberation. If you do not place Burkina Faso above self, above comfort, above fear, bury this again and speak of it to no one. But if you are ready, if you are worthy, then may these words guide you where I could not go. For the homeland or death, we will triumph. Thomas, October 14th, 1987, the day before his assassination. Traoré's breath caught. He looked again at the journal, then at the grave. The truth had not died with Sankara. It had been hidden, waiting. Voices called out in the distance. His security! He wrapped the journal and note back in the cloth, slid them into the box, and concealed it beneath his jacket. He brushed the disturbed earth flat with shaking hands. "I'm coming," he called, rising slowly. The box pressed against his chest as he walked away, its weight equal to the burden now laid upon him. Presidential Palace. Later that morning, Traoré sat alone in his private study, curtains drawn. The leather journal lay before him. He opened it. The first entry, dated 3 years before Sankara's death, read, "Today I received information that has shaken me to my core. The geological surveys conducted by the French before our independence. Survey they claimed proved we had no significant mineral resources, were falsified. The real data, smuggled to me by a contact in Paris, reveals vast deposits, gold, uranium, manganese, zinc. Enough to change our future. Page after page documented a devastating conspiracy. the deliberate underdevelopment of Burkina Faso, the manipulation of financial systems to keep African nations poor, the puppet governments, the lies told in dusty offices in Paris and Washington. Folded among the journal's pages were copies of maps, documents, and secret treaties, signed by predecessors who had traded sovereignty for foreign favor. One transcript, dated 1984, recorded a conversation between French officials and mining executives. "The key is to maintain the perception of scarcity," said one minister. "If these countries knew the truth, they would nationalize. We must control the narrative." "Sankara is becoming a problem," an executive replied. "He's demanding original survey data. Perhaps it's time to cultivate dissent inside his circle." The final entries chilled Traoré. "I am certain my time is short. Blaise has met with French officials. My security detail reports strange movements. Western media has begun their campaign, calling me dictator, Marxist, threat to stability. The same lies told before. Lumumba died, before Nkrumah, before Olympio." In the last pages lay a manifesto, a roadmap to economic sovereignty, resource nationalization, agricultural independence, a Pan-African alliance that could resist sanctions, coups, and foreign meddling. If multiple African nations act in unison, Sankara had written, "They cannot coup us all. They cannot assassinate every leader. Unity is not just our strength. It is our only path to true freedom." Traoré closed the journal. His hands trembled, not from fear but from clarity. This was no longer just his presidency. It was a continuation of a revolution, interrupted, and now history was watching. Traoré read every word, absorbing Sankara's vision, his warnings, and his hope for Africa's future. By dawn, he had made his decision. Over the following week, Traoré moved with deliberate precision. He shared the journal only with his most trusted advisors, those whose loyalty to Burkina Faso was unquestionable. Together they began drafting a plan inspired by Sankara's blueprint, but adapted to the realities of the present. "We need absolute secrecy," said Defense Minister Ouagadougou, one of the few briefed on the discovery. "If Western intelligence catches even a whisper of this, they'll do to you what they did to Sankara." Finance Minister Kabore finished grimly. Traoré nodded. "That's why we must move fast, but smart. Their first priority, verify Sankara's claims about hidden resource deposits. Under the cover of an agricultural development initiative, Traoré dispatched teams of geologists, trained in Russia and China, not the West, to the locations marked in Sankara's maps. Their equipment was disguised as soil testing apparatus. Only the team leaders knew the true mission. The reports that came back surpassed even Sankara's estimates. Modern technology had made resource detection more accurate, revealing deposits even larger than what the hidden surveys had suggested. The gold reserves alone are 3 times what official records show, reported Dr. Ouagadougou, the lead geologist, in a secure briefing. The uranium in the north ranks among the richest on the planet, and there are vast lithium reserves, unmentioned in Sankara's journal, but now critical to global battery production. Finance Minister Kabore could hardly believe it. "If we manage these resources ourselves, we can fund our development for generations. No loans, no foreign aid, no strings attached." "Which is exactly why this information was hidden from us," Traoré replied. "But verification is only the first step. According to Sankara's notes, acting on this knowledge alone would bring swift retribution, just as it had for him." "Assassination?" Ouagadougou murmured. "Or the modern equivalents, economic strangulation, manufactured insurgency, media, vilification. Traoré tapped the journal. But Sankara offered the antidote too. Synchronized action across nations. We cannot do this alone. The next phase was even more delicate. Using secure non-Western channels, Traoré reached out to leaders in Mali, Niger, Guinea. Nations that had recently begun to reassess their post-colonial relationships with the West. I need to show you something, he told Mali's transitional president in a coded video call. Something that could change everything. But I must do it in person, under absolute security. Similar conversations unfolded with other heads of state. All were cautious, skeptical, but intrigued enough to agree. 2 weeks later, a clandestine summit convened at a remote military facility in central Burkina Faso. The leaders of 7 West African nations arrived discreetly. No motorcades, no press, no protocol. Security was handled by a joint team of loyal officers from each nation. Communications ran through encrypted networks built by African tech specialists. In a secure underground chamber, Traoré laid it all out. Sankara's journal, the verified, resource maps, the strategy. What you're proposing is revolutionary, said Niger's president after hours of deliberation. A complete restructuring of our relationship with the West. It's not my proposal, Traoré corrected. It's Sankara's, hidden for 35 years, because our predecessors weren't ready. The question is, are we? Guinea's leader leaned forward. The timing is perfect. The world is multipolar now. China, Russia, India, Brazil, partners who don't demand colonial terms. Meanwhile, added Mali's president, the West is in disarray. Energy crises, political infighting, economic instability. They're not in a position to react with strength. What about the technical capacity? Asked Senegal's president, the most cautious of the group. We've been told for generations that we can't manage our own resources. A colonial lie, Traoré replied. African engineers, geologists, economists. Our talent is immense, but we lose them to Western firms because we've never had the structures to employ them at home. Until now, we've identified hundreds in the diaspora ready to return, ready to build. For 3 days they debated, revised and refined. When they emerged, they had forged what history would call the Ouagadougou Pact, a bold, synchronized strategy for continental sovereignty. Its core tenets were audacious: simultaneous nationalization of all major resource operations, with compensation offered, but no negotiation on ownership. Creation of a new shared currency, the Sankara, backed by verified gold and mineral reserves, for intra-African trade, redirecting exports to non-Western markets, Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, on terms that respected sovereignty. Formation of a mutual defense pact, complete with shared intelligence and rapid response units to deter foreign intervention. A continent-wide public information campaign exposing the history of resource theft and empowering citizens with the truth of their nation's wealth. At the close of the summit, Mali's president gave voice to their collective concern. The backlash will be fierce. Sanctions, sabotage, maybe worse. Are our people ready for what this will require? Traoré held up the journal. Sankara wrote, "The colonizer's greatest weapon is not his army or his wealth, but the belief he instills in us that we cannot survive without him. Our people have already sacrificed for generations, labor stolen, futures mortgaged. This time their sacrifices will be for their future, not for foreign shareholders." Preparations began immediately. Each country began positioning key personnel, securing infrastructure, and drafting contingency plans. Economists finalized currency rollout strategies. Military leaders conducted coordinated readiness drills. Intelligence officers monitored for signs of external meddling. Traoré knew surveillance was intensifying. Western agencies had likely noticed unusual patterns, anomalous meetings, uncharacteristic alignment between old rivals. But the heart of the Ouagadougou Pact remained secret. The journal's existence was known only to the inner circle. One evening, as Traoré reviewed final plans, his security chief entered with a grim update. "Mr. President, we've detected increased communications from the French embassy. Diplomatic staff has doubled this week. Satellite imagery shows unusual activity at French military bases in neighboring states. They know something is happening," Traoré said quietly. "But they don't know what." "There's more," the security chief continued. "We intercepted 3 separate attempts to infiltrate your inner circle. Bribes, large ones, offered for information." Traoré's expression didn't change. "Accelerate the timeline. We move in 2 weeks, not 3. June 15th, 2023. Exactly 3 months after Traoré discovered the journal at Sankara's grave. That morning, citizens across 7 West African nations awoke to a coordinated, simultaneous announcement. Each leader appeared on national television, explaining the Ouagadougou Pact and the steps being implemented. Today, Traoré stood before the cameras, Sankara's journal in hand. "Citizens of Burkina Faso, I come to you today with a truth long buried. Our nation is not poor. Our land is not barren. What we have lacked is control over our own wealth." He raised the journal. 35 years ago, President Thomas Sankara uncovered this truth, that geological surveys had been falsified, that secret deals were struck to surrender our birthright, that our poverty was not a natural condition, but a manufactured one. Behind him, massive screens displayed maps, charts, resource estimates, irrefutable, data contradicting decades of official reports. Today, we reclaim what is rightfully ours, effective immediately. All mining operations are under national control. The Sankara, our new currency, backed by our gold, is now in effect for trade across the region. We do not seek conflict, but we will no longer trade freedom for permission. As his words echoed across the continent, one thing became clear. Africa's era of quiet compliance was over, and the world was about to change. Partnerships with nations that respected African sovereignty began replacing decades of exploitative arrangements. The international backlash was immediate and predictable. Western governments condemned the nationalizations as illegal expropriations, violations of international law. The IMF froze all aid programs in the affected countries. Financial sanctions followed swiftly. Western media painted apocalyptic forecasts: economic collapse, humanitarian disaster, a return to chaos. But something unexpected happened. The divisions Western analysts had confidently predicted among African states failed to materialize. Instead, more countries expressed interest in joining the movement. Far from panicking, citizens rallied behind their governments with unprecedented resolve. Most surprising of all was the reaction from non-Western powers. China, Russia, India, and Brazil promptly recognized the nationalizations and offered favorable trade terms. Turkey proposed a sweeping infrastructure investment initiative. Iran pledged technological support for resource processing facilities. The weeks that followed were turbulent, but not catastrophic. Western corporations pulled out, taking expertise with them. Yet many individual engineers and technicians, motivated by opportunity or belief, chose to stay. hired directly by the newly formed national resource authorities. Banking sanctions created short-term obstacles, but a regional workaround soon emerged. A new currency system, named the Sankara, allowed trade to continue among member states. Gold and uranium exports to alternative markets brought in immediate revenue, softening the shock of transition. 60 days into what Western headlines had dubbed the African Resource Rebellion, Ibrahim Traoré stood at the site where it all began, Thomas Sankara's grave. A solemn crowd had gathered for the unveiling of a new memorial. As the cloth was pulled back, it revealed a bronze sculpture of Sankara, his arm raised, pointing toward the horizon. At the base, engraved in bold script, were his words, "Everything that man can imagine, he is capable of creating." Traoré held up a worn leather-bound journal. "This testament," he said, "hidden for 35 years, has illuminated our path. But the true testament to Thomas Sankara is not in these pages. It lives in our choices, in our courage to continue what he began." He gestured to the diplomats gathered, leaders from across Africa and the global south. "What began as a whisper at this grave has grown into a movement that cannot be silenced. Sankara wrote that we must dare to invent the future. Today, we are not just inventing it, we are building it." As the crowd began to disperse, a small girl approached Traoré. She held a handmade flag of Burkina Faso. "Mr. President," she asked, her voice trembling with sincerity, "my teacher says that because of what you found, I might grow up in a different Africa than my parents knew. Is that true?" Traoré knelt to meet her eyes. "What's your name?" "Mariam, sir." "Well, Mariam," he said gently, "your teacher is right. But the change isn't because of what I found. It's because, after decades of being told we couldn't stand alone, we finally decided to try." Later that evening, beneath the presidential palace in a secure chamber, Traoré met with the leaders of the Ouagadougou Pact. The mood was focused, tinged with cautious optimism. "The first phase has exceeded expectations," Mali's president reported. "Economic disruptions were limited. Public support remains high. The Western response, while aggressive, has been uncoordinated and largely ineffective." "And resource extraction?" Traoré asked. "Production dropped 40% when Western operators left," Guinea's leader replied. "But we're already back to 70% capacity. By year's end, we expect to surpass previous output. The difference, this time, the profits stay here." Niger's president added, "The most remarkable development has been scientific. Once our engineers and geologists began collaborating, without Western intermediaries, we discovered we had more expertise than we imagined." "And security?" Traoré asked, turning to the military commanders. "There have been attempts," Mali's security chief acknowledged. "Increased mercenary recruitment in neighboring states, drone activity near borders, unusual patterns at Western military installations. But our unified intelligence network has neutralized most threats before they could take shape." "What comes next?" asked the president of Côte d'Ivoire, the latest to sign the pact. Traoré opened Sankara's journal to a dog-eared page. "Control of resources," he read, "is only the foundation. The superstructure is what we build on top. Education, that produces African solutions for African problems. Healthcare tailored to our people's needs. Agriculture that feeds our nations. And industry that adds value to our own raw materials." He closed the book. "In short, we move from independence, in name to independence, in fact." 3 months after the pact's launch, Ibrahim Traoré stood before the United Nations General Assembly. Western delegates had threatened to walk out, but curiosity held them in their seats. "I stand before you today," Traoré began, "not just as the president of a nation, but as a representative of a people who have reclaimed their sovereignty. Sovereignty," he continued, "is not defined by the shape of borders on a map or a seat in this chamber. It is defined by a people's control over their land, their economy, their future." His voice did not waver. "For too long, the relationship between Africa and the West has been cast as one of benevolence. Your aid, your expertise, your investment, supposedly lifting us from poverty. But we now say what history has always shown. This has been the greatest transfer of wealth in human history, not from the West to Africa, but from Africa to the West." The hall fell silent. Diplomats from former colonial powers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Africa had spoken, not in protest but in power, and the world was listening.